Hello everyone, and welcome to Radio Bible Light, your spiritual friend. Radio Bible Light is the radio you can watch. We offer Christian guidance 24/7 on our website, radiobiblelight.com. We appreciate your questions and comments, and you can reach us through Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Our phone number, toll-free, is 1-800-930-3475, or you can text us at 1-587-887-4453, or email at info@radiobiblelight.com. Radio Bible Light broadcasts live every Friday from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. And our guest tonight is Marc. Going to introduce a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, my name is Marc Andrade. I'm the teacher at Chinook Winds Adventist Academy here in Calgary. I took religious studies and as well as an after-degree in education, so that's a little bit about myself.
Where did you study?
I studied my religious studies at Canadian University College, now known as Burman University.
And what made you become a teacher?
Well, maybe become a teacher. Yeah, it's kind of a story. I can share a story, right?
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, originally I studied religious studies to become a pastor. I wanted to get into some kind of ministry. And it wasn't until I think my third year of practicum that I was actually placed in a really small town, southern Alberta, and I found myself teaching in a little classroom inside it was actually a hockey change room, turned into a classroom. Beautiful place. You can tell the difference. But I found myself teaching like 6 kids in a multi-grade classroom, just teaching them Bible stories and stuff. And I'm like, man, this is a nice environment. I feel like this is the kind that I really relate best to and do best in. And it was kind of there in that moment in this little small town. I was sleeping in a closet at the time. It kind of hit me like, man, I think I really want to be a teacher. So.
Nice. What's your favorite part about being a teacher?
Well, other than the management and cleaning up after your kids, I really like just the opportunity to spend time with them and see them every single day. You know, when I was preaching like in churches and stuff, you kind of go up there, you preach a sermon, and you kind of just do your thing and you sit off. But when you're teaching in a classroom, you see the kids every single day. They can't hide their problems from you. They can't hide their questions and stuff. And seeing them and kind of being alongside of them, that's kind of what I like most about teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And why religion? What kind of put you towards that path?
As in, why did I study religion?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's another tough one. I think I was still really young. I think like 18 years old. I was currently taking nursing back in Manitoba, in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And it just kind of hit me that I thought like, and I really wanted to focus more on God. I was always heard of God, and I grew up in the church. My mom and my dad always taught me about God. But I kind of wanted to take it more seriously, and I thought, you know, what better way to actually make it my degree, make it my study, and spend every single day studying the Bible. And I thought it would make it easier, I guess, for me to get closer to God. Turned out it wasn't really that much easier. Actually made it even more difficult, made me ask deeper questions, and doubts started to come out. But I chose it because I just really wanted to get to know God more. And that's why I think I took religious studies.
And right now you teach at CWAA?
I do, yep.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that a lot of the students, when they choose religious studies, is that possibly some of the questions they have in their minds? They want to learn a little bit more, but then they have a few?
Well, I think in the school I teach, religious studies is actually a requirement for them to take. So I can't really say that they're sitting there choosing. As opposed to when you go to college or university and you take religious studies, you kind of choose it. You have to. But I think like my opportunity here teaching religious studies and teaching about God in a classroom setting, I have the opportunity to actually get them interested in it, right? And not treat it just like any other course where you just have to do it. I don't think a relationship with God is something that you should be forced to do. So I think I have the opportunity to make it interesting, something that they actually want to pursue a relationship with Him and to study religion and study more about God.
And what kind of religious topics do you normally cover?
Wow. Well, I teach grades 7 to 12, religious studies, so the topics really vary, but the essence is really kind of the same. We're teaching this new program called the Encounter Program. You can find it on the Alberta Education site. And this program kind of talks about all the possible topics, but really the main focus is the Bible itself. Like, we study right out of the Bible. And it gives the opportunity to study it, have a meaningful connection to what they read and what they study. It really encourages them to have a relationship with God. And it teaches them how to kind of be servants to other people and how to minister to other people. And the topics can vary anything from, you know, how does God look at abortion, right? How does God see homosexuals today, right? And all these different topics and all these questions come out, and we have the opportunity to have a space where we can honestly open up and study and discuss and see what the Bible says about those kind of things.
So speaking about those kind of topics, what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered as a religious studies teacher?
Oh man, the biggest challenge is a tough question. I think one of the most difficult things is to find this balance, I'd say, between treating religious studies like a class, like a math class, like a science class, where you gotta learn, you know, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, and if you don't, you fail. Still maintaining that classroom environment, but also you're teaching about somebody who's real, right? You're teaching about a God who lives and having a relationship with him. And I think finding the balance between, like, hey, you have to do this, but at the same time, it's your choice, and this is something I want you to continue to choose as you grow up. Finding that balance is something that I really, really struggle with, and continue to struggle with. And with God's help, I hope we're doing well.
So another question that I hear a lot out there is, do you have to be a person of faith to study religious studies?
I don't think so. No, not at all. You know, you have to be a mathematician to study math. No, it could be driven by interest. It could be driven by, you know, anything really, right? In my class, I don't treat a person who is a Seventh-day Adventist Christian or a Muslim or anything. I don't treat them any differently. They can come into a space and ask questions about what I'm teaching. And I try my best to be open to all of that. I don't think a certain type of person needs to be in a certain place in their life before they can come to God. And I try to treat our classroom the same.
And if you have a religious degree, if you're studying religion in school and you want to learn more about it, where could that possibly take you in the future?
Okay, so I guess if you take religious studies in university.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've only been to Canadian University, which is now Burman, and over there we have kind of two options. You can take religious studies, and then you can take a pre-professional track. Religious studies, you study main classes, such as theology and just other, like Matthew, Mark, studying the Gospels and all that, the Pentateuch and stuff. You can study all those things. But if you take the pre-professional track, now you're going into more of like pastoring as a profession. In that track, you are required to do a practicum where you're actually working with a pastor for a few months, even spending time in the summer working under a pastor and really focusing on the profession of a pastor. So with a degree of religious studies, it could be treated almost like a general course or general studies course. But the pre-professional track really gets you that into becoming a pastor. You get to meet pastors, you get to meet people in the conference and all that stuff. You have interviews with the conference presidents. So that's generally the way to go when you're taking religious studies.
And you mentioned theology. Is there a big difference in between religious studies and theology?
Well, theology is the study of God. So, I mean, there could be religious studies about other deities, right? So religious studies can be very general. Even at Chinook Winds, when I teach religious studies, it's a requirement, let's say, for the senior high to take courses and learn about all the different world religions. So we're not just studying about God and the God of the Bible. In theology, especially the one at Burman University, like we are focusing on the Seventh-day Adventist faith as well as the God of the Bible. So I think that's kind of where the difference and the similarities are.
And since it's a topic that you have to take in school, that students have to take it, do you ever get any concerns about studying the other religions? Do the parents maybe ever get concerned about that?
I think I had a few parents talking to me about, you know, are you trying to baptize my child, you know, by the end of the year? Not in a threatful way, you know, just a question. And I told them no, you know, as a teacher, of religious studies, I'm here to create an environment where they can ask questions about the Bible, and where I use the Bible as the source of the answers. So I think when it comes to that, I haven't faced any like serious issues or problems with it, because I try to teach it just in a sense as a class where they can ask questions, where they can express their doubts, and I'm here to answer from this perspective of the Bible, from this perspective of the Adventist faith.
Is there a purpose for learning religion in school? Is there something that it helps with for the students?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean that's my subjective opinion. Obviously, I believe in God, and I believe that He has a vital part in our lives. He's the reason why I'm here, and I think that in religious studies, as I teach religious studies, the focus is showing them how God can actually help you and take part in your life, how He can be a friend, He can be a guidance, He can be a counselor, He can be a comforter. And in that sense, I think it's really important to teach about religious studies. It also gives us the opportunity to express and answer some of the questions that, without a doubt, young Christians are going to face when they get out into the world, right? There's a lot of people, we look around in media and stuff, God is not really always the center of it anymore. It's almost hard to believe in God these days when you look into the media and the public. So just the ability to, I guess, address that here in this classroom, right? And to teach them that, God is still alive. He's still working. You can have a relationship with Him. He can help you out. He can be there when you're feeling lonely. And I think those key elements are really important, especially to me.
Yeah, I was actually, when I was in, I think it was grade 5 and 6, they were back in Europe. They also teach religious studies in the classrooms as well, and you have the choice to leave the classroom if you don't want to participate, but
Yeah.
Sometimes it's interesting just to hear all the different perspectives of different religions out there, to understand what everyone else sees actually.
Yeah. I tell them that if they get really uncomfortable, they can leave. I don't know if that's really allowed. But no one's left yet, so that's kind of a good thing.
That says good things about you. Another question I had was, what do you see that interests students the most from a religious studies perspective? What's their favorite topic to discuss?
Oh, okay, wow. Well, I guess the first part of that question, what do I see drives their interest? I really take the example of Jesus when He talks to people. In the New Testament, He's talking to people, and He's talking to them in ways that make sense to them. He's using, the best analogies that He can. He's talking about a farmer, talking about things that they actually relate to. And then driving in that point at the very end, the kingdom of heaven is like this, And I think, for me as a teacher, what I found to be most effective with young people is using analogies that make sense. Now, sometimes they can be cringing. I try my best not to be like that, that awkward, mentioning stuff like Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat. Yeah, I don't even really know about it. But just using analogies that really interest them. A lot of students, you can't deny they watch stuff like superhero movies these days and stuff. And there are ways to use these things and examples to drive a point about God, using the things that they watch, things that they see, the things they hear about and read these days. You can use those analogies. I think using personal stories and experiences and testimonies, right? When I'm talking about things that I've gone through, issues that I've dealt with, you can just see the students' eyes light up. In fact, there's this thing, I'll just mention, a basketball player. I'll mention a celebrity, and I just see kids wake up. Sometimes you got to do those kind of things just to drive their interest and really drive it home. Yet still expressing God for who He really is and the characteristics of God and the Bible.
Have you ever had the challenge of someone that isn't a Christian or is questioning whether God is real, and have you ever had to deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Almost, every week, I have students coming in, sometimes frustrated, saying I don't think God is real. Sometimes students come in saying, I think this is, a bunch of garbage. I don't think any of this is true. But at the same time, I do have moments where students come in like with amazing revelations. There was this one instance where I was I was teaching a class talking about faith, right? And really just giving God a try sometimes. And a lot of people are really afraid to test God. We don't want to be like Satan in the wilderness testing Jesus. But at the same time, I told them that if you're really questioning, and you really don't know, and you have so much doubt in your heart, you can ask God, and God can show you something. And I say that from my own experience, right? God can show you something. Like, he's not just waiting in the back asking you to follow me blindly. In moments, Jesus said himself that he performs miracles, right? So that people can believe they can deal with their hearts. So I told him, God has this thing. You can reason with him. You can sit with him, and you can talk to him, right? And he can show you something. And I was kind of teaching this thing, crossing my fingers like, oh, I wonder if they're going to go home and test this now. I'm scared I might lose my job. So two of the students, they're not Adventist Christians. They go home, and they have like this conversation on the bus, apparently. One of them had like lost his shoes in school. It happens all the time. I tell them, clear the bathroom, but they lose their stuff all the time. He lost his shoes, and on the bus in the morning, like they were talking, and I kind of forget the whole situation, but one of them was kind of afraid that their parents would get kind of angry for losing shoes. It's the beginning of school, so they pray, and they've never done this before. They pray. They say, God, Mr. Andrade has been teaching us about you, and we can have faith, and we can reason with you, and you can do these amazing things. Like, show us something. And he prayed that he could find his shoes. He comes into the school that morning, goes to the office, says, I don't have my shoes today. And the office is like, we found them. And in that moment, I remember like I was teaching RS, religious studies, that morning. He comes to me, and he goes, Mr. Andrade, God's real. He showed me something. And I'm just sitting back, I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I do believe that God really showed him little things like this, like he's done in, I'm sure, all our lives. These little things he shows us just to remind us that he's there, Not that he's a genie or anything. I try to tell the kids, like, now it doesn't mean you go and pray for $1 million, right? But sometimes God does these things just to remind us that he's there, So, yeah, that's one of the situations that happen. It's really, really amazing.
Yeah, sometimes it's the little things,
No, absolutely.
Have you ever been asked what is, by the students, what's the difference between religion and spirituality? Yeah,
that's a question I ask myself, From my understanding, the definition of, like, religion is, it's kind of like religion is kind of like a group or a stance on something, right? Like we all stand for something, and that's what religion is. Yet spirituality is more of the personal connection to it. I think that's where aspects of a relationship with Jesus comes in. You can be religious and not even really know God, and that's how I tend to answer that question, right? A lot of the students can grow up kindergarten, grade 12, learning about God, memorizing, the whole Bible, but never really sitting down and spending time with God. Never getting that opportunity to really like hear the still small voice of God speaking to them, right? And I think that's where the spiritual aspect comes in our religion anyway, in any sense. And I think those two are really important to like differentiate and teach, that you can be so religious, but not have a relationship with God at all. And both are important. You can be super spiritual and think, God talks to you and like all this stuff, but not know anything about what the Word says, right? And I think you need both. And yeah, so that's how I teach that.
I have to ask, what does a typical day in your classroom look like?
Oh man. Okay, well, morning comes in, we have homeroom. We do things, I teach a homeroom class, I teach the grade 8 class. And that's kind of like very structured, just like every other teacher has to do. And throughout the day, I teach like 6, 7 religious studies courses just back to back to back to back. So I teach the grade 7 to 12, like I said. And it's really, really different. Something I found that really works is I'll teach maybe like a certain text from the Bible, a certain story or something. And sometimes I teach it to all different grades, but just in different ways. And it really helps me understand the Bible more. It helps me practice the thought, right, and get through it and see how deep these Bible stories go, right? From a grade 7 perspective to a grade 12 perspective, they can be so different, right? And that's how I know that the the Word of God is living, and there's so much more to it. You know, you can read it 1,000 times and get something new out of it. And that's kind of typically how I go throughout the day. I also play basketball during lunchtime, you know, just to get my physical fitness in there once in a while.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Radio Bible Light. You can reach us at radiobiblelight.com. Text us at 1-587-887-4453 with any questions, or email at info@radiobiblelight.com. Back to Mark over here. We were just telling us a little bit about a typical day in the classroom. What about a typical lecture in the classroom?
A typical lecture. It's a really good question, because I don't think there's such thing as a typical lecture. For example, one time I spent like 2-3 days straight just discussing about how gossiping is bad. One time we spent, I think, 4 straight classes talking about how Christians and Adventists view homosexuals. Sometimes we spend, you know, hours and hours just talking about just any questions about life, dating. That's a big one. So I can't really say that there's a typical lecture. For the most part, every single day I come with at least 2 to 3 plans. You know, sometimes it could change. Once in a while, a class will come in and I got this like amazing plan. You know, we're gonna do 1, 2, 3, read this, do a journal entry, and all this stuff. They'll come in and I see them kind of like, you know, drowsy and tired. I'm like, okay, change it. I gotta change it right on the fly. Talk about something different. Talk about something more interesting. Do an activity or something. For the most part, though, in all my religious classes this year, we're doing journal entries. By the way, there's no homework in this class.
Oh, they must like that.
Oh yeah. No tests, no quizzes. Easy for me as a teacher to grade, yet harder at the same time. Journal entries, just kind of like putting in their thoughts on paper in a journal for them to keep and one day even look back. I think it's cool. Some of the grade 11s now have been keeping these journals since grade 8 or 9. And just today we opened them up and I just see them like flipping through it, just like smiling and laughing and looking at the different things that they were talking about. Some of them use the journal for an opportunity to ask questions that they're not confident enough to ask in class or to express themselves. I had some students in class seeming that they believed and liked everything I said, and then wrote a letter in the journal saying like, I think all of this is useless and I don't like this class, you know. And I had the opposite, where some students are like, you know, half asleep all my classes, but then like writing such interesting questions and things that they've learned and all this stuff. So as for typical lecture, I don't think there is a typical lecture, and that's kind of the joy I find in this job.
A question we received from one of our listeners is, how do you teach students about the church when they only see the church in a negative light?
Well, the thing is, I've seen, and going into this teaching profession, I already assumed that all young people don't like the church. And when I came in and I started teaching, I realized it's not the truth. You know, that's not a fact. A lot of people still love the church, disappointed by it, you know, maybe even hurt by it, maybe not liking it, but still loving it. So when it comes to students seeing the church in a negative light, I think I have the opportunity, because I kind of stand in the middle of 2 generations at this point in my life. You know, I love the church. I'm here today because of it. But I also agree with some of the negative lights that may be shone on the church. And I find myself, for the most part, getting young people to focus less on people and more on God, just simply. It's like, you know, looking at a doctor, right, who is out of shape, you know. And I think we do that. We treat the church the same way. We think that when we go to a church, and I keep telling the young people this, like when you go to the church, you expect all these spiritual people. You expect God to be shown in every single person you meet, but you got to realize that, in a sense, the church is a hospital. It's where sick people go, where people who are struggling go to find answers as well. And I think just giving them that kind of information, letting them realize that and understand that, helping them understand each other, understand that even as a teacher, as an art teacher, I make mistakes as well, right? And to put that much pressure on God by saying the church is supposed to represent him all the time in all ways, I think is unfair. And I tell them this all the time. You know, I tell them, you go to a Christian school. You know, what do you think other people look at you as? Right? We're here learning, we're here growing. And I think another thing is I found to be effective so far is when you have young people focusing on a relationship with God and the benefits of a relationship with God, how he can help you with the problems that you're going through. And just focusing more on him and letting God kind of speak for himself in that sense. And getting them to focus less on the problems in the church and more on like who God is. I think I find the young people being more interested in going to church. I have a bunch of students who want to even start a church, you know, or have like alternatives and all this stuff. And sometimes we even treat RS classes like church, where some of them want to preach, some of them want to sing, and just kind of share stories with one another. So I think the negative light on our church is because of just an ultra focus on people too much, and their sins and their mistakes and their problems, and not enough of just like looking at God and focusing on a relationship with him. Really good question. Thank you.
Yeah. We have one more question from another listener. What do you do if your beliefs as a leader in the church do not go with the actions of the church as a whole?
Ooh, tough question. I'm not the conference president, so I'm not really the one to go to with that. I think that's a tough question for me to answer. I understand where that's coming from, I think, but difficult question. Maybe not for me.
What are some of the most challenging questions or topics the students will normally ask you while you're having your discussions in the class?
I think the most challenging questions or situations in the class is when students come to me about problems that I can't really help them with. The thing that I lose the most sleep on is, let's say, when a student comes to me and shares problems from home, you know, and asks me questions like, where is God? And I have to see them every day. You know, I have to see them come to my class expecting something. And some of the problems I can't really deal with right away. And unfortunately, as cliche as it sounds, like, it's something that I just need to really pray about. And questions about, you know, depression, you know, issues with that. It's things that I can't immediately deal with. And it is my personality to want to fix a problem in front of me, and I can't. Not all the time. Sometimes I really just need to give it to God. Sometimes I just need to express that, you know, God is still there. You know, and sometimes the students are rolling their eyes at me when I'm saying that. And sometimes I even ask myself, like, you know, where are you, God? You know, and I'm sure we all ask that in our own lives, right? It's those questions and those situations that really are the most, I'd say, stressful. But then those are the situations that also remind me that I'm still growing. You know, just because I'm a teacher, I don't know everything, you know?
Yeah.
And just because I'm a teacher doesn't mean I can fix all these problems. But I think those are kind of the most challenging and stressful questions. Right?
Any favorite topics that they usually like to talk about?
Yeah, dating, for sure.
Yeah?
More personally, my own dating relationships. But no, for sure, it's got to be relationships. Every single time I open up like a discussion, like, all right, are there any questions? I try to do it at least like once a month.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to go more once a week. Every time I ask, like, you guys, do you have any questions? There's always one about love. You know, what is love? What's the point, right? What does God think about this? Sex before marriage. And also always about, like, relationships. Is this okay? What can we do? What can we not do? All these things. It seems to be that's the most prominent question, I think. It comes up the most. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you ever have challenges trying to answer them, or?
I wouldn't say, I mean, it is a challenge. It's a challenging question. You know, I try not to talk about my own relationships or experience too much. You know, I don't want to give them, you know, the insides of my whole life. But I don't know. I think I try to always bring God up. And they always kind of do this thing like, oh, here we go, Mission Andrade is always bringing up God's love for us, right? But I really do think that God, you know, God is the perfect example of love. What it means, what it looks like to have unconditional love. And I always try to bring it back to that. And using stories in the Bible about God's never-ending love for people. And despite people make mistakes, that God can almost see beyond that, right? And that God always tries to change you and be there for you. And I think this generation, these young people, they kind of struggle with the idea of loving people unconditionally. Not just in a dating relationship, but just friends, family, right? Loving people because you choose to love somebody, right? And I think that's kind of a point that I always try to make. You know, we're kind of losing the idea of like what it means to really love and how God loves us and how He loves us before, you know, we were even born because He chose to, right?
When you answer those kind of questions, if a challenging question for any of your students, I understand there's only about 2 or 3 that are not Christian. How do you make them understand, or how do you explain to them certain things if they weren't raised to believe in God?
Well, something I do, you know, every single time when the year first starts, I really give an introduction to, you know, the Bible. Like, what is this thing? I realized, because there was a point where, you know, I wasn't in the church, and I went to an Adventist school, and it was just like kind of new to me. When I was in kindergarten, I went to a Ukrainian Catholic school, and he kind of just like took out like the Bible and everything out of me. I'm like, what is this, right? And I know that awkwardness and like, what is that? So I always try to present at the very beginning of every year, and when new students come in during the year, I tell them what the Bible is. You know, like, this is a book, this is a collection of stories and testimonies of people who had relationships with God. And God somehow, like, miraculously maintained it for thousands and thousands of years. And that in itself makes this book very interesting. There's a reason why the Bible's the #1 selling book of all time, right? Why you find it in a hotel drawer. Like, there's a reason for it, you know? And then that's what we're reading from. And I try to give that explanation right off the bat, right in the beginning, that this is what it is, and we're reading from it. And I believe that there are lessons to learn from this. And that's kind of generally how I teach that.
Would you say that that is one of the focuses of this religious studies? That's one of the most important values about teaching it to your students?
Absolutely. This new Encounter program that can be found online. It's not open to everybody. It's really open to teachers who've taken the course and all this stuff, but it's available online. The focus of it is using the Bible as the main textbook, I guess, in that class. We no longer have any, you know, Bible textbooks. We try to teach everything from the Bible itself and gather all the answers to questions from the Bible and do activities based around reading the Bible and writing down reflections in our journals and just kind of using the Bible as the general and main source of and our textbook in our class.
We have a few more questions from some of our listeners.
Yeah.
Okay, turn off your computer and listen. Okay. Tell us what you want to ask.
So I was just wondering, what do you do when you're in a classroom and your kids are speaking badly about the church? Like, how do you tell them that, like, the church is stronger or stuff like that?
So the question is, how do I deal with a situation where a student is kind of bashing on the church then? Well, I think I treat that question like any other situation where a student is bashing or complaining or gossiping or talking badly about anybody or anything. That it really comes down to you trying to understand the situation as a whole, putting yourself in their shoes. Why do things happen? It's not always just, you know, face value. Why does a church act this way? You know, why do you not like it? Could there be a difference in just culture? Could it be a difference in just age sometimes, right? Could it be a difference in outlooks, worldviews, ideas, all that stuff, right? And it goes the same when there are students hating on one another. You know, why is this person doing this? Why is this person doing that? I don't like this, I don't like that, right? Instead of me sitting there and like gossiping with them and saying like, yeah, you're right. You know, I try to get them to understand, like, maybe you don't understand like where they come from. Like, their lives at home are not like yours.
Yeah,
and kind of
point of view.
different point of view, right? To open them up to the the idea and the maturity of trying to understand where people come from and being more open to that and realizing I teach social studies as well, one grade 8 social studies class, and it talks about worldviews. And I think that fits in perfectly, that everybody has their own ideologies and perspectives of things, and we just need to understand that sometimes. And we got to believe that God is big enough to deal with all those things. That just because you don't like a way that a certain people worships or sings or preaches or talks doesn't mean that God doesn't like it, right? That God can take any of that, that God sees the heart, and we should thank Him for that. So I hope that somehow answers your question.
Yes, and if you do have some more questions, once again, you can reach us through Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. You can call us at 1-800-930-3475. Text us at 1-587-887-4453, or email at info@radiobible.com. A few other questions. As you mentioned before, some of these are available online. How can someone study what you are teaching?
Well, I have a degree in pre-professional religious studies, and I took that at Berman, like I mentioned earlier. Now, I think the job that I have right now is kind of an odd one, because I originally studied to be a pastor, but then I took an after degree in education. It was a 2-year degree. I had previously a whole bunch of like biology courses that I've accumulated. I took 2 years of nursing back home. I did like a semester of, I wanted to be a doctor at one point, long ago. And I had all these courses that, I can kind of use all together to get an education degree. So I actually graduated with a major in religious studies, but then a minor in biology. And it just so happened, and I really do think, it's a long story, but I really do think that God really had His hand in all this. This is something that He promised me before, a long time ago, before I saw any of these things come into fruition. But I guess together with my theology degree and my education degree, I was able to become a religious studies teacher, right? And that gave me like kind of the openness to, teach in a classroom, as well as like be open to teaching other courses. I teach a social studies class, grade 8 social studies. I teach some options class like arts and leadership. So for how to get a job like this or get this profession, I really do think it was the religious studies that gave me the background to teach about religion, but also the education degree that gave me the opportunity to even be in a classroom and teach. So it's kind of those things together that, God somehow worked out for me.
We have another question from one of our listeners. What do you think church should look like today in 2018 to reach young people?
Oh man, I'm getting into trouble. It's really interesting because I spent about a week on this question for each of the grades, and I found something very similar among all of them. I'm sure most of us are familiar with Martin Luther's 95 Theses, right? With his complaints of the Roman Catholic Church. Well, not really complaints, but the issues of the Catholic Church back then. And we were studying about that, and one of the students kind of mentioned, like, we have our own 95, not that they had 95 things, but they had their own list of issues with the church. I was like, you know what? Yeah, that's the point of this class. Like, let's address this. So I took out paper on the whiteboard and I said, well, let's go through it. Let's list off all these things. Some of them were very valid. Some of the complaints or the issues that they had were something that we've heard, and I've been in that position before, where we feel like young people are not given the opportunities all the time. And even when they are they really given the full opportunity, the ability to really be responsible? Or are they kind of like given like the stage, but there's someone in the back like watching, like make sure you don't do this, right? Some of the things that they listed down were youth-focused events on Sabbaths, like things to really to do and to lead out in, things that interest them. And it just kind of went down the list of like all these different things, and I was like, hey, let's put it together and see what would it be like. And I kind of made a document. I summarized all the things that they listed down into a 9.5 theses, actually. It was 9.5 things. I think the half was like serving certain food at potluck. I just had to throw in a 9.5 to make it sound interesting. But I gave them the document and said, all right, here you go. This is the things that you all agreed on of what makes, what a church would be like, one that you would like to go to. And the question I always ask them is like, what would the church look like? One where you would be open to inviting friends and people outside the church to you, you know. And I gave them that document and said, all right, because you know this is now your responsibility to do and to take action, you know. And if you can't do this, then I don't know why you're complaining about the church and why they don't do certain things that they know they should do if you can't even do it with yours. So something that we do now, it's kind of like practice church, you know. With that document and the things that they listed down, I have them kind of do their own church and do things that they like to do. I give them the opportunity to put on events or organize things that they like to do, just to give them that practice and give them the encouragement and the motivation to be leaders in themselves, right? And I think that's our job as teachers, to train them and give them the ability and confidence to do things themselves. And I guess that's kind of how I deal with that situation. It's limited, obviously.
But that sounds like that sounds really well, actually.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that list one day.
I can show you. Yeah.
Another question we have is, does reaching out to the kids every day ever get lonely?
Of course. Whoever asked that question, thank you for expressing that. That is the word that I can summarize it with. It is a lonely thing. I think for me at this age, you know, there are not many people that I know. There are a few. There are a handful of good friends of mine that are kind of in the same place. But it's hard to find people of this age doing the same thing that I can relate to in this sense, right? And in that sense, it does get lonely. It does feel like sometimes, and I know it's not the truth, but sometimes it feels like, oh, am I the only one out here doing this? You know, I wish I could talk to somebody about it. You know, I think that's kind of necessary. And I know that when I spend time with God and I talk to him about it, you know, he tells me that this is a moment in my life where I need to really just push through and depend on him more than ever before. You know, how much can you do on your own with me? You know, how much can we do, just me and you? And I think that process really taught me and helped me see issues in myself and things that I lack in my own leadership, in my own desire to be a minister, I guess. And so yeah, you know, it does seem lonely. It does feel lonely sometimes, but never more in my life have I really felt the comfort and the, I guess, the connection to God that I do now. You know, I legit like spend, after I do a long day at work, like 8, whatever, 9 hours, I go home and I just go for a walk. And I just try to spend time with God, you know, and I find so much comfort and peace in that. So lonely, yes, but at the same time, no, not really. Yeah.
Another question we have is, what do you feel is the right course of action on the topic of alignment with the most righteous and brightest levels of piety?
Oh, that's a deep question. Wish I had more time to answer something like that. That's a tough one.
He does have a follow-up.
Okay. Ooh.
Should we go vegan to save all lives in our environment, or just develop insensitivity and ignorance to the request of the Proverbs, King James Bible?
Tough theology questions.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to actually have to skip that one, but I'd like to really address that. If you can give me a contact, I'd like to have like a conversation. In fact, whoever asked that question, if you're in Calgary, come by the school. I was kind of teaching a very interesting thing related to that. But that's deep, and I really think that right now I need to do some of my own research so I can say the right things here.
For sure.
Yeah, thank you for that question, though.
Speaking of the school,
Yeah.
where do you know the address? Maybe our viewers could find out, see how they could maybe sign up.
Do I know the address? That's an even tougher question. It's 10101 2nd Avenue. That's Southwest. How do you locate that? Well, there's COP, Canadian Olympic Park. There's a building that looks like a Pizza Hut. It's got a roof. It looks like a Pizza Hut right to the right of it. That's where our school is. You can also check online, cwaa.net. That's the online site for there. And you can have all the contact information there too.
Wonderful. And before we finish today, do you have any funny stories that happened in the classroom with the students?
Funny stories. Oh, well, there's a lot. That's kind of a question to put on the spot.
Any favorite funny stories, perhaps?
I'd say the funniest situation that happened to me as a teacher. Give me a second here, you know. That's certain things, you know, I don't want to really say out. Some of them are a little more personal. I'd say the funniest one was I was kind of teaching a class about, once again, like love and dating, and I was just kind of telling a story about, you know, like past relationships, personal situations and stuff. And one of the students kind of like, you know, he's smirking in the back or whatever. And he's like, man, Mr. Andrade, like always talking about like his past loves. I'm like, whoa, no, not the case or whatever. And there was this rumor, and he kind of expressed it, that there's this rumor kind of going around that like I was, you know, just dating like everywhere and all this stuff. Like, no, that's not the case. It's just kind of a funny situation because I realized that I'm always talking about like relationships, right? And love and dating and all this stuff, because that's the question they ask, and they start like calling me stuff like the love guru and all this stuff. And some students are coming to me like at class, like asking me like, oh, should I date this person? I'm like, whoa, that's not my job. I'm just a religious studies teacher. But I think that was kind of one of the funniest ones when I realized like, wow, like these students, they really hear me and they really listen to what I'm saying. They really see like the patterns in my lifestyle, and they know all these things. And it was funny, it was interesting, kind of embarrassing, but yeah, that was one of them.
Someone is asking to tell the story about the Black Shack.
I know who's asking this to you. Yeah, there was a... Really? Huh. There was this... I have a friend. I'm pretty sure that's who's asking the question. He came to our school, and he's a taller guy. And there's Shaquille O'Neal, NBA player, retired NBA player. And some of the students were saying, like, hey, you look like Shaq. You know, and then one of the other students, she's a really funny girl. She, I don't think she even knows the, like who Shaq is. She kind of just like tags along with what everybody's saying. So she went up to him and says, "Hey, like you look like a big black Shaq." And my friend just got like so like shocked and kind of embarrassed. I'm like, "Hey, wait, hey, like don't be saying that kind of stuff," so she don't understand. So yeah, funny question.
Any others that spring to mind?
I don't know. There's so many. It's just like...
For example, do you ever take any trips with the students?
Yeah, we took a few trips. We even took one here to Central Church, kind of just serving some elderly, like just food under Christmas time. This year, I haven't really got the opportunity to go on many trips, unfortunately. Something I'm trying to focus on a little bit more in the new year. I kind of want to take them. We have some in the plans of... on a weekend going to an animal shelter and just kind of like doing some service out there. All the students have a requirement to do a certain number of hours of service every single year, which can be difficult because our theme this year is having a heart for service, yet it is a requirement to serve. And I'm trying to teach them that, like, you know, when you serve, like Jesus, when he served, he did it out of compassion and love for other people, not because he had to. So it's tough to kind of plan events and trips where the students are doing it because they want to, but still like meeting their requirements. Something I kind of focus on this year is when it comes to service, you should be doing things that you're interested in. You know, if you're interested in soup kitchen and serving homeless people, like do that. But if you're not, I really think it's almost negative, almost a negative experience to do that and to be forced to and have a not a heart of service, but being forced to do service, right? So I think this year I focus more on like internal things, like how can we help each other? Having some boys helping the younger boys in basketball, or tutoring them in classes that other students are struggling in. And I count that personally as service hours, because they're going out of their way to do things for other people to help in need that they have a passion and interest for.
Yeah, that's nice. Before we close for today, I just wanted to maybe review a little bit of how to find CWAA for those who were tuning in a little bit later, and a little bit about the required course, RS, and if they can reach it online, where they can find it online.
So if you want to go to Chinook Winds Adventist Academy, just simply go online. All the contact information is there. Lara Melashango is our principal. I believe she's actually going to be on this show next Friday. So that's a really good time to ask those questions. She'll really talk about more about it. But CWAA.net, that's the website where you can go on and just see our school, learn more about us, our philosophies of education, of Adventist education, and all the contact information is there.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate all of your questions and all of your comments. And if you do have some more questions, you're welcome to message us again on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Call toll-free at 1-800-930-3475 or text at 1-587-887-4453. And if you don't mind, Mark, I think we're going to close with a word of prayer.
Sure. All right, let's pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for the Sabbath. We thank you so much for this opportunity to discuss the topic of religious studies and basically just learning more about you, Father. I thank you so much for all the listeners and the viewers out there. Lord, I just pray that someone out there is encouraged to learn more about you, to study, maybe even come to one of our schools and take religious studies, Father. We just thank you so much that you are a God who wants to have a personal relationship with us, and we thank you so much for your love. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.